We can reach our deficit reduction targets and help ensure fiscal stability while avoiding not only the damaging automatic cuts, but also avoiding devastating cuts to defense, health, education, and other programs vital to America and to its families. Achieving this goal will require sacrifices. Everyone's going to have to contribute, but if all of us, every American, will make the sacrifices necessary, we can get this done. How can we do it? Well, we could pretend that we can resolve this problem by ignoring why we got here, to try to balance the budget by simply cutting more spending, or we can take a realistic look at both spending and revenues. Just a little historical perspective might be helpful here. Federal revenues today are at the lowest share of gross domestic product in generations, just 14.9%. For the past 60 years, that number has averaged about 18%. And during that period, we have balanced the budget 5 times, and each time revenues totaled 19% of gross domestic product or higher. Past efforts to reduce high deficits have made new revenue a significant part of the equation. President Reagan presided over 3 deficit reduction plans that achieved more than 3/4 of their deficit reduction through revenue increases. That was President Reagan. Revenue increases were a major part of his deficit reduction plan. The deficit reduction legislation that we passed in 1990 under the first President Bush achieved about 1/3 of its deficit cuts through added revenue. President Clinton's 1993 deficit reduction plan was roughly 55% new revenue and 45% spending cuts, and yielded our most recent balanced budgets. Apart from history, the mathematical reality simply is that we must generate additional revenues if we're going to reduce the deficit, and do so while avoiding unacceptable cuts to programs that provide for the common defense and general welfare. Revenue must be part of the discussion. Many of our Republican colleagues have focused solely on non-defense discretionary programs for deficit reduction. The simple fact is that those programs just are not big enough to allow real deficit reduction. They make up only about 12% of the federal budget, and if we eliminated all those programs, zeroed them out, we would have done grave harm to millions of American families, but we still would have huge deficits as far as the eye can see. And so, as the Concord Coalition, a nonpartisan group, said, for a grand bargain on deficit reduction, finding a way to bring in some revenue is a crucial piece of the puzzle. And the Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which said that putting the deficit on a downward path requires, quote, looking at ways to generate additional revenues. Now, Madam President, the balance of my remarks, which I'm going to put in the record, I set out 7 different loopholes which need to be closed. It is only fair that these loopholes be closed. They are loopholes which cannot be justified. They are loopholes which I think almost every American would say should not be in our tax code. And if we simply will change our tax code and reform it and close these loopholes, we can raise about $1 trillion over 10 years. That is a huge part of what this Joint Select Committee is required to do. We have to protect middle-class families from tax increases. We have to protect them from losing critically important programs to them, such as education. We can do that. And I've sent a letter to the members, including my dear friend from Massachusetts, of our Select Committee, laying out these 7 areas, 7 loopholes which can and should be closed, which will have an equitable impact. It is only fair these loopholes be closed, and I have laid out, including ending the use of offshore tax havens to avoid paying taxes. And in this letter that went to all of the members of this Joint Select Committee, I have set forth what these loopholes are. And again, we can raise $1 trillion in 10 years by closing them.